Hey everybody, welcome back to Truth Revealed. I'm Sergio Denaro. Today I am doing episode 2 of the Kelsi German case in the Delphi Murders. Now the first episode I did in a more narrative style. I got a lot of feedback, and what I got from that was that it was a little bit harder for you to tell exactly what my analysis was and where I was getting certain information from. So I'm going to finish recording my analysis on Kelsi German in my older technique, where I'm going to look at my computer screen and I'm going to go through the indicators and tell you what I see from each indicator individually. Then at the end of the video, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave comments and tell me which style you like better. I think there's something to be said for the narrative version. I think that's more entertaining, and my entire analysis is in there. But if you really want to know how did I get to each individual point, then I think you're probably going to like the second half a little better. But anyways, let's dive back into Kelsi German's statement here. At the point where we left off, Kelsi was talking about the search that the police department was beginning to coordinate and all the volunteers that were coming together. Now she's going to explain why the search was called off and how she feels about that.
I believe around midnight, the search was called off for whatever reason. They said it was because of the safety. The terrain was really rough and rugged, and they just didn't want people to get hurt. They didn't want to have to put their resources into helping other people when we needed to find the girls. That was really defeating, knowing that the search was called off. I went home to try to sleep, and I didn't get any.
She says they said it was because of the safety. The terrain was really rough and rugged, and they just didn't want people to get hurt. Notice she says the word said, which is the more toned down. It's the more negative version, which means she's not happy to hear this information. And then because is an explanatory statement. They said it was because of the safety. So that's a sensitive issue for her. The word just means that there's something else other than people not getting hurt. That's the reason why they didn't want people to continue looking overnight. Then she goes on to say they didn't want to have to put their resources into helping other people when we needed to find the girls. Now there's a couple of things here. She says the girls. She's always referred to Libby and Abby as the girls. That's very important for us to note, because you will almost always see a change in language from the killer regarding the victims. Before the victims are killed, the killer sees them a certain way. After the murders, the killer is going to see the victim in a different way. Either they become more of a liability because now they're endangering the freedom of the killer now that they're dead and the murder's been committed, or they were such a stress on the murderer before they were killed, and then the murderer feels much better after they've been killed. That change in reality for the killer leads to a change of language, and that usually comes across as a difference in what the killer calls them or the verbiage that they use to describe the victim. In this case, our subject is Kelsi German, and she always refers to Abby and Libby as the girls. Anytime that she separates that and doesn't call them the girls, calls them Abby and Libby, that might seem like a small change, but verbally, that's very significant. We want to look for that. At this point, all I'm saying is that the verbiage hasn't changed. She's still calling them the girls. All right, the next thing that I want to know here is the word just. Just means that there is something being removed. They just didn't want people to get hurt. The correct way to say that is they didn't want people to get hurt. To add in extra unnecessary verbiage means that your brain is thinking about something specifically that's causing it to add the word just, which means that there's more than one reason. But the subject doesn't want to say the reason, so they remove the real reason, and then they add the word just. It was just because they didn't want to have to put in the extra resources. What that tells me is that there was another reason, and in this case, we know that Kelsi was withholding information from the police at this point. She hadn't told them that she knew that there was another random man from the internet, Anthony Schatz, who was meeting the girls, who was probably involved in their disappearance. So she removed that bit of information. She says the police just didn't want people to get hurt. The police also didn't know that there was a greater reason why they should keep looking. Kelsi at this point has the belief that the girls aren't just lost. They're actually being detained or something happened to them because of this man from the internet. And the police don't have that information. So the police don't have that same sense of urgency that Kelsi does in this moment. If you've been following my analysis up to this point, and I know that the narrative from part one was a little bit different, but just to recap here, Kelsi, in my opinion, based on her verbiage, Kelsi knew that Abby and Libby were going to meet this random stranger from the internet, Anthony Schatz. and she hasn't told anybody about that yet. Now, in my analysis here, you're probably understanding what I'm getting at here is that Kelsi didn't murder the girls. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm saying Kelsi is completely innocent of everything. I'm saying that this is reality, and in reality, everybody plays a certain role in this story. What we want to find out is what is the role that Kelsi actually played. My goal is not to villainize her because of the role that she played. I don't villainize people, and I don't anoint sainthood to people either. What's important here is finding out what actually happened. Just because somebody is not the killer doesn't mean they didn't make mistakes. In fact, it doesn't mean that the role that they played is completely innocent. Now, in this situation, Kelsi hasn't told the police information. This is my opinion, of course, which is why you get this verbiage here, which is why they called off the search. Now, had the girls been murdered at, say, 5 o'clock in the morning, then I would say that Kelsi's selfish reasons of not wanting to get in trouble and not wanting people to know that she knew that they were meeting someone and she didn't tell anybody about it, then that would have played a role. But because at this point, based on the forensic evidence, it's believed that Abby and Libby had already been killed at this point, this becomes irrelevant information. It doesn't change the intent of Kelsi to not tell the police that they were meeting somebody, but it doesn't end up having anything to do with what happened to the girls. So now that we're clear on that, we'll continue here. Next, she says, that was really defeating knowing that the search was called off. That's important verbiage there. Defeating is a weird way of saying that. And by weird, I mean you just don't hear that a lot, which means Kelsi is using that word and she's assigning a certain meaning to it, and we need to figure out what exactly she means by that. She says it a couple more times later, so we're going to compare those statements later once we've seen how she uses that. But notice here, she says, that was really defeating. She doesn't say, I was defeated. She's not placing blame on herself at this point. She's placing blame on the police. And notice, the police are making decisions based on having a lack of information at this point because of the information Kelsi hasn't told them. So then she says, I went home to try and sleep and I didn't get any. We don't get a whole lot from that. I didn't is a negative statement, but I didn't. Whenever you put I in front of didn't, there's personal commitment there, and likely she really didn't sleep that night. All right, let's look at the next section of her statement here.
We got up the next morning and we headed out to look again. We were all put into groups, and then I was put into the group that actually got to cross the bridge, and the others stayed behind to look on the wooded area that's over on the other side.
She says, we got up the next morning and we headed out to look again. We were all put into groups, and then I was put into the group that actually got to cross the bridge, and the others stayed behind to look on the wooded area that's over on the other side. So the only thing that we really get from this statement here is she uses the word we a lot, which means she does feel connected to this group. And then she stumbles when she gets to the wooded area. There's something about the wooded area that's problematic for her. I don't know what it is because nobody's asking her questions about that. So I don't get any extra information. The only information I get is that that's a sensitive area. Literally, that's a sensitive area of territory, of terrain. The wooded area. Anytime people are repeating words, it means that there's more going on in their mind. And their mind has stopped thinking about the words and is thinking about what is actually happening there. And the words start to stumble. That's a sensitive area, and I don't know why. All right, let's look at the next section here.
We're looking underneath the bridge, and as soon as we'd gotten back to the private drive, somebody yelled up the hill that they'd found a shoe. And knowing that I dropped the girls off and I remembered what they were wearing, I knew exactly what shoes my sister and Abby were both wearing. So as soon as they yelled up what type of shoe it was, I knew exactly whose it was.
So she says, and we were looking underneath the bridge, and as soon as we'd gotten back to the private drive, somebody yelled up the hill that they'd found a shoe. Okay, that is just narrative information there. There's nothing deceptive. She says we, so she's still committed and feels part of this group. Then she says, and knowing that I dropped the girls off and remembered what they were wearing, I knew exactly what shoes my sister and Abby were both wearing. Okay, so we have a couple of issues with this statement here. She says, knowing that I dropped the girls off. That is the wrong way of saying that. Anytime somebody says they know something happened, it means that that area is very sensitive, because knowing what you're saying goes without saying. Anybody who's telling you something that they did knows that they did what they did. And so to have to say that she knows that means that there's something sensitive about when she dropped the girls off. And we'll understand that in just a second. Then she says, I remembered what they were wearing. Now this section here actually uses some pitch inflection. So let's play that one more time here.
And I remembered what they were wearing.
All right. Did you hear that she says, I remembered what they were wearing? It went up. And when you get that inflection in the pitch, that is almost always a deceptive statement. What we get from this is when she says, I remembered, it means she doesn't remember. So I remembered now becomes a deception tag because she uses that word to emphasize that she doesn't remember something. We have sensitivity around knowing that she dropped the girls off, and then now she says that she remembered something that she doesn't remember. And it's what they were wearing. Okay, let's continue on. But it's important that you understand the analysis here. She doesn't remember what they were wearing. That's all that she's saying at this point. Now, of course, you're going to ask the question, why is she telling you that she remembers what they were wearing if she doesn't remember what they were wearing? We'll figure that out in just a second here. So then she says, I knew exactly what shoes my sister and Abby were both wearing. Okay, that tells you very specifically that she doesn't know that based on the sentence before. So as soon as they yelled up what type of shoe it was, I knew exactly whose it was. The so is an indicator of sensitivity for what she's about to say. She's over-explaining. And then the last part of this is said truthfully. As soon as they yelled up what type of shoe it was, I knew exactly whose it was. That part is truthful. So how do we make sense out of all of this? Why the deception if in the end what she's telling you is truthful? And the answer is she wants to come across as being in charge, the expert. She wants people to look to her for information. She wants to feel important there. And that's a very distinct personality type. In the interrogation booth, you want to notice that when somebody wants to be the person who is in charge, who knows the information, who is figuring things out, some people, that's important to them, that sense of authority. And that is important to Kelsi. That is all this tells us. Let's think about what she said for a minute. Sisters, now this is just based on my own personal experience with stories that I've heard about my wife's sisters. Sisters usually know their other sisters' wardrobes inside and out, especially when they're close in age or size, because they're always stealing each other's clothing. So I have no doubt that Kelsi, the minute that she saw or heard the description of Libby's shoe, knew that that was her shoe. She's probably seen that shoe 500 times. Now, that doesn't mean that she knew that she was wearing those shoes when she got out of the car. I'm saying when your sister gets out of the car and you see them walking away, you may notice their clothing. In here, Kelsi didn't, which is not criminal. It doesn't say anything about malicious intent here. What it says is that she didn't notice that what her sister was wearing. Now, that doesn't mean that given the description of the shoe or seeing the shoe that she's not going to recognize it. Of course, she's going to recognize it instantly. What this tells you is something about Kelsi's personality. It doesn't tell you about her intent to harm Libby. What it tells you is that she wanted to play a role in finding Libby.
It wasn't long after they told us that they'd found the shoe that a searcher found the bodies of the girls. I was totally defeated.
Next, Kelsi says, it wasn't long after they told us. Okay, so wasn't is a negative statement, but it's not connected to an explanatory statement, so it's not problematic. It wasn't long after. After is missing time, so we got to figure out what she removed here. And then she says told. Told is the more positive way of saying something, the more assertive way. So she says, it wasn't long after they told us that they'd found the shoe. So she's talking about the shoe here. The word told, it tells me that Kelsi actually felt positive about finding the shoe. So while she's been thinking that the worst could possibly have happened, she's still hoping to find the girls alive here. Now, it wasn't long after they told us. So the word after here tells me that there's something that's cut out here. And I remember hearing that Kelsi wasn't allowed to see the girls right away. So there was some conflict there where she wanted to go and she wasn't allowed to go. So that's why you have the word after. That's the information that is sensitive to her that gets cut out. And then she says that a searcher found the bodies of the girls. So at this point, the bodies means that the girls are dead. And in Kelsi's verbiage, we do not see a change of language. The girls were the girls before they were murdered, and they were the girls after they were murdered. This tells me that Kelsi can't be the one who murdered them or planned on murdering them or literally had anything to do with their murders. Because even if you're involved in planning the murders, but you didn't do it, you are still going to see a change of language because of the change of emotion that goes along with it. Now, I can visualize your comments already. There's no change of emotion after they're dead. No, of course there's a change of emotion, but there's not a change in the way that she views her sister and Abby. Because She loved her sister. She felt a connection to her. She wanted to be looked up to by her sister. And once her sister died, none of that changed. The way that she felt about her, the fact that she loved her, that she wanted to be her protector, that she wanted to be the one that is looked up to. Now, notice that's a theme here. We've seen that through this entire statement. Not only the part where she was sensitive about what they were wearing. Kelsi, that's part of her personality. She wants to be looked up to, and she wants to be admired. That's the word I was looking for there. She wants to be admired by people. And the fact that the language doesn't change around the girls being dead means that Kelsi could not have had anything to do with this. And then she says, I was totally defeated. Now we have a change from that was defeating to I was totally defeated. That is the change of language that's important here, because she was personally invested in finding the girls and being the one who rescues them. She wants to be that person, the one that rescues them. And now she says, I was totally defeated, because at this point, she can't rescue them. So the language, her verbiage is very clear here. All right, we'll continue on.
That morning, I had actually packed a bag with a granola bars and a blanket in them, hoping that the girls would need them. They would be so happy to have a granola bar after being outside all night.
She says, that morning I had actually packed a bag with a granola bars and a blanket, and then hoping that the girls would need them. They would be so happy to have a granola bar after being outside all night. The only indicator of sensitivity in here is the word after, missing time. She says, after being outside all night. The time that she's chunking out is them being alone in the forest overnight, the difficulty that would bring them. So that is explained there. Now, keep in mind that when you see a missing time statement, you're looking for the chunk of time that has been removed to be explained. If somebody says, I went to the movies, and after the movie, they're saying after, but they have removed a chunk of time, and they've told you the chunk of time that they've removed. If somebody says, I went to church, and then after the service, that is the correct way of saying that. If somebody says, I went to a football game, and then after the game, they're telling you they went to the game, and then they're telling you that what I did there is the same as what everybody else does. And then the after is that 3-hour chunk of time that's removed. Here she says, after being outside all night. So she tells you the part that's removed. It only is problematic and indicates conflict if they don't explain the part of the piece of time that they have removed, because after always means that time was removed. Okay, now we're going to look at the next sentence here.
So after that, the experience is very blurry. I don't remember much up until the funeral, to be honest.
She says, so is a sensitive statement. Then she tells you, after that, the experience is very blurry. To say that it's blurry sounds like she's trying to gloss over information there. And then she says, to be honest, which can either be deceptive or truthful. It can mean that she's embarrassed about not having very good memory after that. The factor that is going to explain what this means to us requires that we have some knowledge about trauma, about what happens after an event like that. And it turns out what she's saying here is pretty common. After a traumatic event like the murder of siblings, this is something that you usually see from somebody who was not involved in the murder. The interesting thing is that if you were involved in the murder, then the murder itself wouldn't be traumatic for you. It might be a very emotional experience, but trauma usually happens from something unexpected, not from something that's expected. What she's saying is she is sensitive about a period of time that happened after. She's embarrassed about it when she says, to be honest. She's skipping over the time, but she tells you that she's skipping over it. And then she says, I don't remember much. And then she goes on to tell you a bunch of stuff that she does remember. So yes, technically, the I don't remember much is her way of saying that she was depressed and that she wasn't keeping track of a timeline, but she still actually has a bunch of memories. The reason I'm taking a moment to explain this is that just because you see a bunch of indicators doesn't automatically mean that the indicators of sensitivity are showing you malicious intent. What it's showing you is that there's issues with the memory and there's issues with the recounting of what they're remembering. That's usually due to malicious deception, but here we have to know a little bit about trauma in order to put this into context. And so with a little bit of experience, what we know here is that this is the way that a truthful person is going to remember the events of after trauma, whereas a person who was involved in the murder is going to have much clearer memories. They are not traumatized by the murder. They now are going into fight or flight mode because they need to cover their tracks. And what happens then is the opposite of this. What happens to somebody who is now becoming very purposeful in trying to cover their tracks is you have very detailed memory of everything that happened. If you remember back to September 11th or JFK's assassination or the Space Shuttle Challenger exploding. These things were traumatic for us if you're old enough to remember those things, but you remember every detail because it's not PTSD, it's a less personal trauma. It's something that you remember every detail of. So if Kelsi was involved in the murders here, you would see a very clear recollection of all of the details afterwards, whereas you get her very sensitive about not remembering things. What someone needs to tell her is that's okay. That is how somebody who wasn't involved in the murder deals with trauma.
It was countless interrogations, countless news reporters coming to the house, countless people bringing over bread and pasta. And that's what I remember from those days. I remember laying in my bed crying, and I remember my grandparents crying together. And I remember very vividly the day that I asked my grandparents if we could move my bed into their bedroom, because I couldn't sleep knowing that there was somebody out there, and I wasn't able to talk to anyone about it.
Now, she goes on to say, it was countless interrogations, countless news reporters coming to the house, countless people bringing over bread and pasta, which is very common. It's just a blur of things like that. And then she says, and that's what I remember from those days. I remember lying in my bed crying, and I remember my grandparents crying together. And I remember very vividly the day that I asked my grandparents if we could move my bed into their bedroom. Notice she's telling you right now, I remember those things. She's telling you in the present moment. The deception tag was I remembered. It was past tense. She's telling you that at that time she remembered something. And that is often a deception tag, because when somebody tells you, back in my memory, I was remembering something. I remembered something in my memory. That is often a deception tag, because you can't say something if you're not remembering it. So the fact that you have to mention it means that it's sensitive to you. And if it's sensitive, it's likely wrapped around deception. Here, she's actually, this is present tense, and she's telling you right now, I couldn't remember a lot of things. It was blurry, but what I do remember, and it's in present tense, which is the correct tense. So these are not deception tags because of the tense. So everything is truthful all of the way down until the end. And then she says, move my bed into their bedroom because I couldn't sleep. That is a explanatory statement plus a negative statement, which is a deception indicator. So she says, because I couldn't sleep, knowing that there was somebody out there. Okay, keep in mind that, and I don't say this enough, but if you look through my videos, you see this pattern, which is when you have an explanatory statement plus a negative statement, the deception is not necessarily about, in fact, it's often not about what's happening in that sentence. The deception is going to be within that paragraph, but not necessarily in the sentence that they're over-explaining and giving you negative statements about things that they didn't do. So here she says, because I couldn't sleep, knowing that there was somebody out there, and I wasn't able to talk to anyone about it. So the sensitivity from the deception indicator here is that I wasn't able to talk to anyone about it. She was able to talk to people about it. She chose not to. And again, her involvement with Anthony's shots and knowing that somebody who's out there, she has a much clearer idea of who that person is than anyone else around her involved in the investigation, in her family. She has a piece of vital information that she's not sharing because she doesn't want to be villainized. Remember her personality. She wants to be seen as the hero. Being seen as the villain is the worst possible thing that could happen to her in her own mind. So she decides here to keep quiet about it, which is deception. You have deception through omission here. She is omitting telling people about Anthony's shots. And so this statement becomes deceptive. You see deception indicators here because she's withholding this information. She says, I wasn't able to talk about it. This is leakage. Okay, so let's move on to the next.
I was scared to talk to my grandparents. I was scared to talk to any of my family, really. And I think that's mainly because I knew they were hurting too. Trying to go through something when everybody around you is hurting too. You don't want them to hurt like you're hurting. And so you just keep quiet.
Statement here. I was scared to talk to my grandparents. I was scared to talk to any of my family, really. And I think that's mainly because I knew they were hurting too, trying to get through something. When everybody around you is hurting too, you don't want them to hurt like you're hurting, and so you just keep quiet. Now, in this paragraph, you see a reduction of commitment from really. She says, I was scared to talk to any of my family, really. And I think is another reduction of commitment. And then she says mainly, which is another reduction of commitment. All of that is problematic here. What is she reducing commitment to so much? That she was scared to talk to her family. Okay, so she was scared to talk to her family, but she's insinuating here that the reason why she was scared, actually she's telling you that's mainly because I knew they were hurting too. And that's the lie. That's why you have so much reduction of commitment and then an explanatory statement. She doesn't want her family, the media, the public to see her as the villain. She doesn't want to admit that she knew that there was a random man from the internet that they were going to meet there, because that would draw blame onto her. And so she doesn't want to talk about it. She doesn't want to tell anybody about it. But here, she's telling you that she had an internal conflict. She wanted to tell people, but she didn't want the repercussions upon herself that would happen because of telling people about that. And then she says, you don't want them to hurt like you're hurting, and so you just keep quiet. That's a negative statement plus an explanatory statement. The explanatory plus the negative plus the explanatory plus the 3 reductions of commitment is all telling you that the reason that she's giving to you for not telling people is bunk. So the reason that she doesn't want people to know is because she doesn't want to be blamed or villainized here. Now, I wrote a note here, and I'm going to read you this note exactly as I wrote it. This is traumatic. Kelsi made a decision as a 17-year-old girl to try and let her sister have an experience with a boy that she decided to keep from her parents. Kelsi was trying to be a good sister. She was trying to be a cool sister. She was trying to be someone that her younger sister would look up to. Not that that is implicitly a good thing. That's just based on her personality. She wanted to be looked up to. It's important to remember a few points here. Number one, it wasn't Kelsi's responsibility to be Libby's mother. So right now, if you're following all of this, then you're either putting yourself in Kelsi's shoes and understanding how important it can be to an older sibling to have your younger siblings look up to you, or you're still trying to villainize her. So if you're going to continue to villainize her for simply trying to give her sister an experience that she knew could be dangerous, but she thought legitimately that the worst wasn't going to happen, there's some things you have to keep in mind. First, it wasn't Kelsi's responsibility to be Libby's mother. So if you're blaming her for taking her there, you have to keep in mind that she is her older sister, not her mother or her grandmother. She's not charged with the responsibility of raising her and preventing her from having any bad or negative experiences. That's not the job of a sibling. And the next thing to keep in mind is that no one ever wants to blame a child for their actions, but Libby was the one who was messaging Anthony's shots. Now, it's possible that Kelsi was messaging him too, but in here, Libby was the victim and Abby. But Libby, nobody wants to blame the victim. And that's fine. I'm not blaming the victim either. The only person who's responsible for Abby and Libby's death is the killer. But if you're going to assign blame to Kelsi for driving them there and not telling anybody, you also have to assign an element of blame to the girls who were creating the relationship with Anthony Schatz. And now if you're going to say, well, they were 14, she was 17. Well, I mean, 14 years old is not 4 years old. 14-year-olds still should know better. And then if you're going to say, but at 17 years old, you're almost an adult, you should know everything at that point. No, the human brain is not fully developed until age 25. So a 17-year-old still has a long ways to go until the prefrontal cortex is completely developed, which means a 17-year-old, if you're looking at her like she's 47 years old and should have had that level of responsibility, you're just clearly not remembering what it was like to be 17, because I made some of the dumbest mistakes. I still can't believe some of the stuff that I did when I was between the ages of 17 and 20, because that was where I had an element of freedom and I didn't have the brain power to figure out that I shouldn't be doing that stuff. And so I guess I can understand making bad decisions because I can relate to that. But it's just important to note that. Just keep reality in mind as you're going through this. It will really help to keep everything in context here. Now, the last thing to keep in mind is when Libby and Abby were murdered, Kelsi didn't know what to do. She made the decision to drive the girls there and not tell anyone that they were meeting a man from the internet there. Now, in hindsight, that was obviously a bad decision. But if we're being honest, is there a single 17-year-old in America who hasn't made much worse decisions? Now, finally, the last thing I want to leave you with on that question is Kelsi now has to bear the weight of those decisions, and that will probably crush her at some point in her life. This is not the type of trauma that people can deal with, and it hasn't been long enough. It's only been, 8 years? She was 17, so now she's, 25? She's just becoming an adult as far as the development of her brain is concerned right now. So she has to begin processing what happened as an adult, and she's going to go through the entire process that you may be going through right now. You should have known better. And she's going to start thinking, I should have known better. And she's going to assign blame to herself, which is the blame that she was trying to avoid having the public put upon her, is what she's going to start putting upon herself now. So if you're wondering, when do people usually break under this kind of weight? I had somebody ask me that question. It usually happens somewhere between age 30 and age 50 is where you see those books come out, the bios, this is what I did, this is the whole truth. You see that because as an adult, the people who are involved in these types of situations have to come to terms with what happened, and they have to look at it as an adult. All right, so we're almost done here. Let's look to the next point here.
In the beginning, I trusted the police a lot. There were times I got really angry because I felt like they were interrogating me more than anyone else. And at that point, they probably were. I was the last person to see the girls, and I understand that now. But at the time, that was the worst part of everything. It was so defeating knowing that they wanted to talk to me again, knowing that I needed to give my DNA to them a third time, knowing that they were still questioning whether I knew what happened.
Okay, she says, now she's talking about the police. She says, in the beginning, all right, so that's missing time. In the beginning means that it's not the same now. I trusted the police a lot. Okay, well, now we got the answer to that. She trusted them and now she doesn't. So why? There were times I got really angry because I felt like they were interrogating me more than anyone else. Okay, they were interrogating her more than anyone else because she had information that she was withholding. Here we have a tricky area here because the police clearly made way too many mistakes for that to be unintentional. So there's a level of incompetence that borders on corruption with this police department here. Now, we also, on the other hand, we have Kelsi who's withholding information. So what this means is that, again, you have to think reality here. The police department is corrupt doesn't mean that every single person there is corrupt. It could mean one person is corrupt, and they're corrupting the information that everybody else has, or telling people that they have certain information when they don't, which makes the good cops there do the wrong things because they don't have the right information. And so I'm not saying everyone in that department is bad. I'm saying that we can see that they misprocessed things, like taking her DNA 3 times. That should never happen. But the fact that she was withholding information means that all of the good cops, they're getting bad information from both the witnesses and from somebody in their department. So we have all these problems here for the police department. But that's an issue that we're going to tackle in a minute. Let's get through this statement. There were times I got really angry because I felt like they were interrogating me more than anyone else. And at that point, we have another missing time statement. They probably were. What's the missing time? Why'd she say at that point? At that point is the point where they were missing information. That's why you have a missing information statement here. They didn't know about Anthony's shots. They find out later when they run the phones, but they didn't get that from Libby. Then she says, I was the last person to see the girls. Now, yes, she's making up an excuse as to why they were interrogating her, but notice what's important to me is she says the girls again. We still, even now, were removed from their deaths. So all the way leading up, right after the moment of the murder, and then even far into the future, she still calls them the girls. And then she says, and I understand that now, but at the time, that was the worst part of everything. It was so defeating, knowing that they wanted to talk to me again, knowing that I needed to give them my DNA to them a third time, knowing that they were still questioning whether I knew what happened. So what does all this tell you? It was defeating. Now, she used that word again as the third time. The first time was when they called off the search, which was due to not knowing about Anthony's shots. And now she says it's defeating because they are interrogating her more than anyone else, again, because they don't know about Anthony's shots. Now, she says she doesn't say I was defeated. So the very personal defeating happened when she saw that the girls had been murdered, again, by Anthony's shots, by the one that she knows. So every time she uses the word defeat, it revolves around Anthony's shots. And she doesn't like the police. We get that from this too. So the last question here.
And now I know that they were doing their job, and they still are. And everything they're doing is for us and for the girls, and they are doing such a tremendous job now. I think they've messed up a lot, And I think they're making up for that in different ways. But I have a lot of faith in them, and I know that they're going to be the reason this is solved. In the beginning, there were a lot of things they didn't know. So now that they know more than they did then, they're able to investigate better. They're able to use different technology. They're able to use resources that they maybe didn't have before.
And now I know that they were doing their job, and they still are. And everything they're doing is for us and for the girls. And they're doing such a tremendous job now. I think they've messed up a lot. So she just throws that in there. And I think they're making up for it in different ways. I think it's a reduction of commitment. So I think they messed up a lot. Why is she reducing her commitment there? Well, because she caused some of that. And then she says, I think they're making up for it in different ways. She clearly wanted them to find the Anthony Schatz account without her having to tell them. And then her assumption was that she would never get tied to that and the murder would get solved. She was hoping that all of that could happen without her being drawn into this. As she sees that that's not happening, she's disappointed. But her disappointment, again, is linked back to her own lack of being forthcoming with the information that she had. But I have a lot of faith in them. A lot means not complete. And I know that they're going to be the reason that this is solved. In the beginning, there was a lot of things they didn't know. Again, missing time. And again, she's saying there's things they didn't know, which is what she was supposed to be telling them. Okay. So now that they know more than they did, so now that they know about Anthony Schatz, then they're able to investigate better. They're able to use different technology. They're able to use the technology reference is the phones. So again, this still ties back. She's still tying all of this back to Anthony Schatz, the phone records, the cloud information, the Dropbox account. They're able to use resources that they maybe didn't have before. Do you see how the indicators are so clear? All of the missing time refers to in the beginning of the investigation. All of that missing time is always the missing information about Anthony Schatz that Kelsi had. That's why it's her missing time information, because she had that information and didn't give it to them. So that's the end of that statement. The next statement that we're going to look at, we're going to just drive straight into here, is the car ride transcript. And I will say that I realized here that interrogating somebody while they're driving is a really good tactic, because it is very, very difficult. It puts a stress load on your brain. Your brain has to drive. Your senses are taking in a lot of information while you're driving, and that really reduces your ability to fabricate. And so you're either going to get straight truth or you're going to get a lot of indicators. So it's been almost 2 years. Does it feel like that?
It's been almost 2 years. Does it feel like that?
No, it feels like it was yesterday. It's crazy that it's actually been that long.
No, she answers up front. It feels like it was yesterday. That's a truthful statement. Have you driven this road again since?
Have you driven this route again since?
I did drive it that day, and we've been out here a couple times just to go to the bridge and see the little memorials that are down there.
I did. She answers it right up front. She drives it, whatever, gives a little bit of information. It's a truthful statement. Do you remember that day what you said to them?
So as we approach here, do you remember that day what you said to them?
Well, I wasn't really talking to them. They were mostly talking to each other.
And she says, well, I wasn't really talking to them. So the word well and the phrase wasn't really talking to them means that she was talking to them, but she's insinuating that it wasn't a lot. So now, because of the insinuation, we need to figure out if the literal words that she's saying matches the insinuation or not. Wasn't talking to them. They were mostly talking to each other. So now we have another skewing of the time, mostly. So wasn't really talking to them means that they were mostly talking to each other. And then she says they were mostly talking to each other. That's a perfect distribution of that. And so that makes this a truthful response, because the reductions of commitment both mean the same thing. And the literal meaning of what she's saying is exactly the same as what she's insinuating. And she answered up front. This is a truthful statement. Do you remember what they were saying in the back seat? Was it just like any other day?
Do you remember what they were saying in the back seat on this portion of the drive, or it was just like anything else, any other day?
It was just like any other day. We had the music up really loud, and we were like singing and just some normal things that we did in the car together.
And she says, it was just like any other day. So she answers it up front. That's technically a bad question, because she should have ended that question with, do you remember what they were saying in the back seat? That's what I highlighted here, and she should have stopped talking there. But she said, was it just like any other day? That's a leading question, and when you ask a leading question like that, the answer is going to repeat the lead. Now, she says it was just like any other day. Okay, so that doesn't mean anything there because it's a leading question. Then she says, we is an indicator of togetherness. It means up to this point, she's talking about herself and the girls. There's no conflict. We had the music up really loud, and we were like singing and just the normal things that we did in the car together. So there is sensitivity here. We have two reductions of commitment, like and just. It means they weren't just singing in the car together. There's something that she's leaving out here. What is she leaving out? Well, remember, we're going back in time here, so this is before she dropped them off. There was a conversation. We're getting indicators that are indicating the same information that we got the first time. They were probably having a talk in the car, not a lot, not talking about it a lot, but she mentioned it again, that it's probably not a good idea to go meet somebody that you met on the internet. And that was, and were they making a lot of noise in the backseat? Do you remember what they were saying and doing? So she rephrases the question. She asks it a much better way this time because she ends the question with the actual question.
And were they making a lot of noise in the back seat? Do you remember what they were saying or what they were doing?
Olivia was actually in the front and Abby was in the back. So we were listening to music really loud and we had the windows down. We were listening to some of Libby's favorite songs like Heathens by 21 Pilots, that kind of thing.
So 21 Pilots, Heathens was playing that day. That plays in your mind.
And then right away, she starts the answer with Libby was actually up front. So they weren't both in the back talking. And Abby was in the back. So we were listening to music really loud. And we had the windows down. Lots of we's, lots of togetherness here. We were listening to some of Libby's favorite songs like Heathens by 21 Pilots, that kind of thing. So again, togetherness, but again, reductions of commitment. The word just, the words that kind of thing. She's, again, just omitting a conversation here. She's omitting the same conversation that she just talked about. Then is the afternoon around 1? She says, yeah, like 1:30.
And it was the afternoon, right? It was around 1 o'clock?
Yeah, like 1:30.
So yeah, it's just the question, but then she gives a little bit more specific information, like 1:30. That's truthful. And when you dropped them off, you said, bye, take your sweater. Did they not want to take the sweater or their jacket?
Yeah.
And when you dropped them off, you said, bye, take your sweater. Did they not want to take their sweater or their jacket?
Libby didn't think that she needed to because of how nice it was, but I was like, come on, you know that you're going to need it because it's kind of shaded over there. So she ended up taking it, and Abby had like a short sleeve shirt on, so I was like, come on, you guys can take my sweatshirt. So they both had my sweatshirts on. I remember my last words to them. When they were getting out of the car, I made sure they had sweatshirts. And I told Libby I loved her.
And then she says, Libby didn't think that she needed to. And she phrases that with that pitch inflection again, didn't think that she needed to. So again, this is in regards to what they're wearing. And we have that pitch inflection that indicates deception here. Libby didn't think that she needed to because. So we have didn't and because, which is a negative plus an explanatory statement, which indicates deception. So we have the voice inflection, and we have the negative and the explanatory, which is an indicator of deception, of how nice it was. But I was like, come on, you know that you're going to need it because it's kind of shaded over there. But I was like is a reduction of commitment. Come on, you know that you're going to need it because is an explanatory. It's kind of is a reduction of commitment, shaded over there. So this is made up, this part right here about taking the sweaters. And then she says, so, another explanatory statement. She ended up taking it, and Abby had, like another reduction of commitment, a short sleeve shirt on. So, another explanatory statement. I was like another reduction of commitment. Come on, guys. You guys can take my sweatshirts. So, another explanatory. This is because she's driving. This is why you get the same indicators over and over and over again here. So by the time she gets to, so they both had my shirts on, we have 5 explanatory statements. We have like, kind of, like, and like. So that's 4 reductions of commitment. We have didn't, which is a negative, which means we have an indicator of deception here. And then we have the pitch inflection. So what all of that means, plus it's 61 words before they get to, so they both had my sweatshirts on, so they didn't both have her sweatshirts on. That's what she's telling you. But why? Why is she telling you that that they had her sweatshirts on? That I don't get that information in here. So I don't know why she's telling you this. The only thing I know is that she knows that they weren't wearing her sweatshirts. I remember my last words to them when they were getting out of the car. I made sure they had sweatshirts. She repeats that. Anytime you repeat something, that makes it sensitive. So they had my sweatshirts on. That's another indicator. And then I told Libby I loved her. Told is the positive way of saying that. So she did tell her that. The best that I can tell here, and this is my speculating at this point, the sweatshirts had to be correlated in her mind with some level of protection from the elements, that sort of, what's another word for protection? That sort of element of caring for somebody. Think about the flip side of what they're actually dealing with here. So they're going to meet someone from the internet and they're going to hook up. So when she says they had my sweatshirt, I told them to take sweatshirts. Did she mean, was she replacing the word condoms with the word sweatshirts? Or was she simply just using that as a metaphor for being careful? It seems to me like she's overemphasizing physical protection, the sweatshirts, with not being stupid when they go to meet someone on the internet. Now that's, like I said, just a theory. I don't know what the issue with the sweatshirts is. I have a feeling that at some point in the future, she'll write a book and she's going to explain what she meant with the sweatshirts, or why, or was it literally just she said that in the beginning because she thought that that was the case. Like she said to take her sweatshirts and they just took their own sweatshirts. And so she thought that they had her sweatshirts. And then she just doubled down on that because she didn't want to look wrong. Again, she wants to be that authoritative figure. She doesn't want to be seen as being wrong. So that's possible too. It could be just that simple. And then she says she told her that she loved her. And then the question is, what did she say?
What did she say back?
She told me she loved me too and that she'd see me later.
She says, she told me she loved me too and that she'd see me later. This seems true. But remember, in the first statement, there was sensitivity here. In the previous statement, when Libby told Kelsi that she loved her, Kelsi didn't use the word told. Kelsi used the word said, which had a little more negative impact to it. Here she uses the word told. So let's see if we get anything after this. Then she says, how long after you dropped them off did someone call you and say we can't find her?
How long after you dropped them off did someone call you and say we can't find them?
I think it would have been 2.5 hours later is when I got the call from my grandma.
She says it would have been 2.5 hours later. Later's missing time. What happened during that missing time? That was the time that was with her boyfriend. We already covered that in depth. We know why that's missing time. You probably thought it was no big deal, or did you immediately start worrying?
You probably thought it was no big deal, that nothing was wrong, or did you immediately start to worry?
I figured it was just something like I forgot to do the dishes or something along those lines, or maybe she was trying to see where I was. I never would have imagined it was her calling to tell me my sister was missing.
She says, I figured it was just something like I forgot to do the dishes. There's pitch inflection there. So it wasn't doing the dishes that she was afraid of. It was what she was doing with her boyfriend. She thought that her grandma was calling to check up to make sure that she wasn't screwing around with her boyfriend, or she didn't want to get caught. Then she says something along those lines. So it's either the dishes or getting caught with my boyfriend. Or maybe she was trying to see where I was. So that's maybe it's a reduction of commitment. She's just throwing out possibilities here. That's called dilution, when you keep throwing out possibilities. Then she says, I never would have imagined. So never would have is an indicator of deception here. So never would have imagined means that she had imagined this, which is just indicating to you that she knew about Anthony's shots beforehand and thought that it was a bad idea. Because when she says she never would have imagined it was her calling to tell me my sister was missing, that is something that she had been worried about since the night before. That when she found out that they were going to meet some guy on the internet, every indicator in here says that she was telling them that that was a bad idea. And so obviously never would have imagined that would not be truthful here, and it comes across as not truthful. Then she says, and did you worry right away as soon as you heard that she's missing because that's not like her, or were you calm at the beginning?
And did you worry right away as soon as you heard she was missing because that's not like her, or were you calm in the beginning?
In the beginning, I was kind of calm. I was worried, but I figured like it was like there was a simple explanation for what was happening. I didn't think it would be what it was.
I don't think anyone did.
No, I don't think so either.
She says, in the beginning, which means not at the end, I was kind of calm. So reduction of commitment. I was worried. So she immediately retracts that reduction of commitment. I was worried, but I figured like it was like two reductions of commitment here. I figured like it was like there was a simple explanation for what was happening. So why do you have reductions of commitment? Because there's deception there. Was she worried? Yes. She says, I was worried. So that negates the kind of calm. And then she says, but I figured like it was like there was a simple explanation. She was worried that something had happened based on the guy on the bridge. That's what she's telling you here. I didn't think it would be what it was. That's a truthful statement. I didn't think it would be what it was. So how do you mix that truthful statement into all the deception before? Well, what it was murder. And she didn't think that that was what it was. She thought that it would be sexual assault, rape. She thought that it was going to end up being bad. But she didn't have any idea at that point that it would be murder. And that is exactly what we saw through her first recounting of this. So these are matching up exactly. Even though the verbiage is different, the indicators are telling you the exact same story is what I'm saying. I don't think anyone did. No, I don't think so either. Are you glad you said I love you?
Are you glad you said I loved you?
Yeah, I'm glad that I got to say it one more time.
Okay, remember there was sensitivity around this in the first statement, and we didn't see that same sensitivity yet when she says she told me that she loved me and she'd see me later. So now she says, yeah, and there's a long pause there. Then she says, I'm glad that I got to say it one more time. This is tremendous. The way that she says that has a tremendous weight to it. Are you glad you said I love you? And she says, yeah, I'm glad I got to say it one more time. There is what's happening. What you're seeing in her mind right there is the words are truthful, but the emotion behind it is tortured. And she's reliving in the moment where Libby's walking away, and she had the ability to forcibly stop her at that point, but she didn't take that opportunity. And she's reliving it in that moment as she's telling you the words that are truthful. And so that's why you have to be careful when you see the emotions that don't match the verbiage. It does mean deception, but it doesn't mean that it's malicious all the time. So it's important to understand how the emotions marry up with that. So there you go. That's why she said told before, because yeah, she is glad that she got to say it one last time. But what she's thinking right there is that shouldn't have been the last time. If I would have taken different actions right there, that wouldn't have been the last time. It's not like her sister got in a car accident. It's not like it was unrelated to Kelsi. Kelsi dropped her off there. And while I would never blame someone for that, she's going to blame herself for that. And that's what you see right there. All right, so now we have an interesting question here. So they had asked you before this time, will you drive us? Will you drive us? And you never said yes. Okay, that is a very crucial part of this question. You never said yes. And then this time, you knew you were going to see your boyfriend and you had the time to bring them. Okay, first, as we go through this, you're going to see tremendous reduction of commitment, and then you're going to see indicators of deception. So let's go through this and let's figure out why we have the reduction of commitment and why we have indicators of deception.
So they had asked you before this time, will you drive us? Will you drive us? And you never said yes. And then this time, you knew you were going to see your boyfriend and you had the time to bring them?
I mean, it wasn't really like, they weren't always asking me to take them to Highbridge, but Libby would always ask me to take her to places like, can we go to McDonald's, or can we go to Lafayette and go to see a movie? And it seemed like I was always saying no because I didn't want to go all the way to Lafayette, or I didn't have money to pay for it. So, yeah, this time I decided I'd said no enough that, like, I could handle taking her this time.
She says, I mean. That tells you right now she's not answering the question in the beginning. That's a big indicator of deception. It wasn't really reduction of commitment with a negative statement like another reduction of commitment. They weren't negative statement. Always is like never. So it's a nonsense word asking me to take them to Highbridge. All right. So we have deception and sensitivity around Highbridge. Clearly going to Highbridge is something that they did often, not always saying no, which is what was, never said yes. So she took them often to Highbridge, probably to meet boys. Remember, that ties back to she knew where to search for them if they were going willingly, make out points. That's what's on her mind here. But Libby would always ask me to take her to places. Can we go to McDonald's or can we go to Lafayette to see a movie? And it seemed like, so reduction of commitment, I was always again is a overly definitive term, saying no. And then because I didn't, so that's explanatory plus negative. So we're going into deception again here. Plus, this is well over 90 words here too. So we have deception in the structure, and we have the answer at the end, and we have all this reduction of commitment. So I was always saying no. So she wasn't always saying no because I didn't want them to go all the way to Lafayette. She was taking them on a regular basis to Highbridge is what she's getting at here, because I didn't have money to pay for it. So yeah, this time I decided, I said no enough. Again, we have more reduction of commitment. I said no enough. That reduction of commitment, I could handle taking her this time. So she had taken her there numerous times before to meet boys. That is what all of this is leading up to. All this deception, all this reduction of commitment, all this very long answer is telling you that they went there in the past regularly. And which, again, in your mind, that should be telling you why it didn't seem as scary to Kelsi as it should have, because if that was the first time she'd ever taken her there and it was to meet a guy from the internet at 17 years old, you would think, okay, that's too much. But if she was taking Libby there on a regular basis to meet with boys, now the only difference is that this is a boy from the internet, then you can see how she went down that slippery slope. Do you regret that?
Do you regret that?
Yeah, sometimes I wish I would have been a mean sister and just said no.
Yeah, I wish I would have been a mean sister and just said no. So we have use of the word I 3 times in the beginning here. So this is very personal to her. Do you regret that? I. But this isn't repeating I. There's words in between here. This is overcommitment to this. So you're seeing something that's hitting her very close to home. Do you regret that? Yeah. So she answers it right up front. I wish I would have been a mean sister. This is the weight that she is bearing right now. This is a short, direct answer. She answers in the beginning. She uses I continuously in here. And I can feel the weight that she's saying here, that she wished she would have been a mean sister and she wished she would have just said no. That tells you everything right there. And then she says, but you know it's not your fault.
But you know it's not your fault.
I'm getting there. I'm learning that, I guess.
She says, I'm getting there. I'm learning that. So I'm getting there. I'm learning that. It's not telling you that she knows that it's not her fault. It's telling you that she's aware that there's a process to get there. And then she takes that all back and she says, I guess. That means she is not getting there and she is not learning that. That means that Kelsi is under tremendous pressure right here. This statement is a cry for help. And regardless of what you feel about her up to this point, I think Kelsi's greatest flaw was that she was willing to take unnecessary risk in order to be looked up to. That's her personality right there. That she just wanted to be admired. And in the end, that caused her to make some bad decisions when she was young. And as she gets older now and becomes an adult, the weight of what happened is going to crush her unless she gets very serious help here. So that's my takeaway from this. So the last thing that I want to touch on here, Kelsi does a podcast that she hosts, and she interviews Doug Carter, who is the superintendent of the Indiana State Police. And I thought, if she's the host, she's not the one answering questions here. You only get good information from the people who are answering questions. I mean, unless you're getting leakage, like in the case of the interrogator who was interrogating Richard Allen, and you get leakage that he had involvement in bad policing. So I figured, let's look at this. Let's see what we can see here. I don't think the questions are going to be softballs anyways, so we're not going to see anything about Kelsi. So let's take a look at that.
Really big rumor that the police are covering something up, which is not happening. And I think people could just look at the fact that the law enforcement is going with us to do all these things and realize that that's not what's happening. Like, they're putting so much effort into this. There's no way that they could be.
All right, so the question, and she's very nervous about asking the question, but she's talking about, is the Indiana State Police, of which Doug Carter is the superintendent, are they covering something up? that she gets around to it in a very non-confrontational way. But all right, let's see what he has to say on this.
Private conversations.
Hold on. I need to go back and look at this again. He says, did he just say I? That was that's one of my biggest indicators. So let me look at that response again. Hold on. I promise you that's not happening. Okay. That alone is, I mean, I can't emphasize how big of a problem that is. We just looked at 2 entire episodes of Kelsi and didn't get one single indicator that she had anything to do directly with this. And now the very first thing out of Doug Carter's mouth is I. Hold on. Okay. Let me see what else he has to say here.
I promise you that's not happening. And while I'm here, there will be nothing of the like. Mm-hmm. And that's just a rumor. And that, today in today's world, again, it's easy to say something like that, but take a step back and think about what it would mean for that to actually occur. And it's just not.
Okay, let's analyze this. Okay, hold on. I got to get a transcript here. Okay, so here's the transcript of what he says. Let's go through this. He says, I promise you. He says, I promise you that's not happening. And it's 3 repeated words. While I'm here, there'll be nothing of the like. So he doesn't say that won't happen. He says, remember, okay, so when somebody uses like this, it's the same as me saying, you see this red ball in my hand that I'm not letting you really see? Take a bite out of this. It tastes just like an apple. That the only thing you know is that it's whatever I'm trying to feed you here is not an apple. And so when he says, and while I'm here, there'll be nothing of the like, that's very problematic. We have 2 massive indicators of deception. He doesn't answer the question. He doesn't say no. He says, I promise you that's not happening. So the answer comes at the end of the sentence, which is deception. So we have and, which is an indicator of sensitivity. Then we have of, which is an indicator of sensitivity. And then we have 3 hard indicators of deception here. Then he says, and that's just a rumor, just that reduction of commitment. So he doesn't say that's a rumor. He says that's just a rumor, which is an indicator of deception there. And that, because we don't know. If you say you have to actually know in order to say that. When somebody says that's what that literally means is that I'm explaining or I'm talking to you about a very technical or difficult subject that you already know about. You have a lot of knowledge about that. And so instead of me re-explaining something that you already know, I'm just going to say So if we're watching a football game and you already know the rules to football, we watch football together, and I'm trying to explain how difficult of a situation there is. I'm like, so they got a personal foul, that takes you back 15 yards. Because the person does know. You don't have to explain everything about the rules there. You can just say and it skips over a bunch of stuff. When you ask somebody, is the police department corrupt? And they say, then that is an indicator of deception. Okay, and that today in that is sensitivity, but then we have today, and this right here is a repeating word. In today's world is, I guess, is a reduction of commitment. Easy to say something like that is another reduction of commitment. Don't want to use that anymore. So, and that so that's an indicator of deception. Today is an indicator of sensitivity. In is an indicator of sensitivity. Today's world is, I guess, a reduction of commitment. Easy to say something like that. And he's refusing to actually say. Again, this is the second time he has refused to say the accusation out loud, which is a massive indicator of sensitivity, of deception that I don't think I've ever talked about on this channel before. But if you're unwilling to state the accusation, then that is because of how close to home it hits. So then he says, but take, that's a repetition of a word, and it's a misstatement of a word. So it's 2 indicators of sensitivity right there. A step back. So this right here this is a threat. take a step back. That is leakage. It's what I normally call a confession. But in here, the other type of leakage like this, other than a confession, is a threat. Take a step back and think about what it would mean for that to actually occur. And it's just not. So the closest thing that you get here to a denial is not a denial. It is the lack, very specifically, the lack of a denial. It's just is a reduction of commitment, not. So what do we actually have here? We have a hard indicator of deception. We have an indicator of sensitivity. While I'm here, there'll be nothing of. That's an indicator of sensitivity of the like. That is a hard indicator of deception because he's not willing to repeat the accusation. And that's just a rumor, is a reduction of commitment. And that you know is a indicator of sensitivity. Today is an indicator of sensitivity. In is an indicator of sensitivity. World is, I guess, a reduction of commitment. Easy to say something like that, which is both a reduction of commitment and it's a refusal to acknowledge the accusation for the second time. But there's two indicators here because it's a repeated word and then there's a misstated word here. A step back is a threat, and think about what it would mean for that to actually occur is just a nonsense statement. And it 4 times is more than just an indicator of sensitivity. Just is an indicator of sensitivity. And not is the third indicator that's refusal of him to acknowledge the accusation. And the answer is at the end of the statement, which is a hard indicator of deception. How many words is this? 74 words. This entire statement is a lie. This entire statement is extremely problematic. Okay. Instead of turning this video into a Doug Harder video, I'm going to start the next video with a recap of what we saw right here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a bunch of Doug Harder statements. He's made a lot of statements, so I need to baseline him. I seriously doubt if this is his baseline, that he just repeats every word, but I'm going to dig deeper into this. I'm going to get his baseline and I'm going to do a video where I analyze the statements that he makes. Well, you know what? About Richard Allen for sure, and anything about this case. So that'll be my next video. So that's it. I'm going to end this right here. Let's just call this a day. And now you know what I'm going to be working on for the next video. So I'm sure we will talk in depth about this on Amy's show, Case by Case. So I'm looking forward to that. And that's it. So remember, don't believe everything that you hear on the internet, and let's start to learn some of this stuff for yourself so that you can filter the stuff that you hear. And with that being said, I'll see you in the next video.